I was the youngest child of 7, 2 daughters and 5 sons. I came down in 39. Well, the whole school in Peckham, well, I wasn't going because I was too young, but the whole school moved down here with the teachers and came to Shipley. So they all came down with their little gas mask and the little tag on there saying who they were. I could be wrong on this, but I think there was between Shipley and Coolham was about 160 altogether. Well, I didn't go to school at first, no. But my sister and 2 elder brothers did.
So you were, what, 3, weren't you?
Yeah, 3.5.
So do you remember it?
Vaguely. I do remember Mrs. Bryant, where we all stayed. He was a pig farmer, and because I had 2 older brothers, and it was very useful to him to have 2 older boys, one 12 and one 9, helped him out with the pig farm. Well, they had the teachers that came down with...
but they still had to have room for them, didn't
well, Shipley School's quite a big one. It's Victorian. And of course, half of that went to Coolham School as well. And in some cases, the local children went to school in the morning and evacuees went in the afternoon.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
I've heard that at school.
I seem to remember later on, when I didn't go to school till I was 1942, there was acorn fights and that sort of thing. A lot of the youngsters, they'd never seen cows in a field, or green grass for that matter. And, you know, it was big adventure. And when the aircraft crashed around here from the airfield, you know, they, very often the older ones, were there before the police got there, you know, to take bits of scrap. Mother was a widow, and before the war, he told Mother, because he fought in the First World War, he was in the RHA, Royal Horse Artillery, he was the lead horse driver, as they called him then. And he told, as he got invalided out of the army, he told Mother there's going to be another war, take the children to the countryside, because Mother couldn't do anything about it. And then the the government said the children had to leave London or all the big cities, and that's how we came down here. And after the war, Mother didn't marry again. Her life was her family, and none of us, we were all settled and got jobs within 3 or 4 miles of her. And my brother, who didn't marry, who was in the Navy, he, instead of going back to being an engineer in London, he stayed down here and went into agriculture. Oh, there were very few stayed. I would think, 80 or 90% went back. Teachers were changing quite often, and one thing splits in my stays in my memory is the small classroom at which is now the art room, I think, at Shipley School. There were, because all these children had come from London, they had no waterproofs like Wellingtons or anything like that. I can remember seeing, I suppose how old I was, 4 or 6 or something like that. There were rows and rows of Wellington, shiny Wellington boots in there, and each of those children got a pair of Wellingtons. I can still go into, when I go to the school now, and I go through that room and I can still see those rows and rows of Wellington boots, because all the local children had them. But yeah, it's quite interesting. And I stayed there until 51, because I didn't pass the 11 pass. I had a very poor education. But you learn in life, you do the best that the Lord give you, and that's true.
Were they proper qualified teachers?
Oh yeah, they were.
They were?
Yeah. One was a Mrs. Merritt, who took the juniors, or the infants, and she biked all the way from Partridge Green. Her husband was a butcher, and she biked all the way from Partridge Green and never missed a weather like this, or snow, or unbelievable. A lovely teacher she was. She was probably too good, actually. Oh, discipline was good. I had to cane many times.
For what?
I can remember once, Mrs. Kent, she was the head teacher, came from, and she was Welsh, and she had a teacher husband, but he was much older than her, and he was very deaf, and they had this car in the garage, a wooden garage at the Shipley School, and he was in there, and we all used to line up past the door, and the door was shut, and the key was on the outside, and somebody had turned the key, and he was in there working on his car. A lovely old boy he was. And of course the head teacher, Mrs. Kent, sent a message round for him. Some boy had taken the message round to him and couldn't find him. Anyway, so she done the same thing about half an hour later and still couldn't find him. So she went out, and there he was banging on the what's called door. And of course nobody owned up to it, so all the boys had to line up and have the cane for locking him in.
It was assumed it was a boy then?
Well, they assumed it was a boy, yeah. Well, I can remember all the children going, because they always celebrated the Maypole at Coolham School, which was, William Penn. That was what they call that? Quaker school, and they always do that. And I can remember the whole school walking from Shipley School up the main road. You can just see it happen today, got it? Walking up there to see them practice the May Day around the Maypole. In those days, we had no phone. So my sister had to go down and get the district nurse. I was 11, so what would I have been, about 47, 48. So my sister had to go down and get her. She came on a bike to look me over, and she wasn't happy. So she had to go back home and telephone the doctor, Dickens at Cowfold. And then he came out and diagnosed I got appendicitis. And of course, riding home, I'd broke the appendicitis. So it turned to peritonitis. So he then had to go home and phone the ambulance. And he said to mother, he said, your son's only got a 50-50 chance. So I went into hospital in Horsham, 3 weeks, and I came out. And my brother, came in the hospital with me, he said, when you come out, he said, I'll buy you a new football. And I treasured that new football.
Well, you could have died. So
oh, quite easily, yeah. And National Health had only just come in then, so whether they would have been able to afford to do that operation, no, I don't know. I can remember when the siren went off.
Where was the siren then?
And the nearest siren was at Partridge Green, I think. There might have been one at Coolham, because they had a fire station at Coolham. And if you go down past into Shipley, you'll see there's an oak tree opposite the school. And the eldest boys, it wasn't me, because I was much younger than some of those, used to climb, their mistress made them climb up there, and if they heard a doodlebug coming, or a V1 rocket, he was to shout. And there was another boy in the entrance hall, and he would transfer the message, and they would get on. We all had to get under the tables. And there was a doodlebug, or V1 rocket, came across while we were up in Netherwoods, and that landed in Barnes Green. There's only one house on that road, and it landed bang on that house, but nobody was killed. They made these advanced landing sites for Mustangs mainly, and Polish, Canadian, and New Zealanders. And we planted, and that lasted for 10 months. There was 14 pilots lost in that 10 months.
From this airfield?
From this airfield, and we planted a tree in memory of them.
Oh, wow.
They were support aircraft.
So they were fighting over in France?
Yeah.
Flying over from here?
Yeah.
Ah.
And they used to come, when they came back from Normandy, they looked, especially in daytime, they looked for Chantonbury Ring, and then they could see the windmill. And then when they got to the windmill, they were in direct line with the runway.
Gosh.
Two crashed.
Yeah.
American bombers, they'd been hit on the way back from Cherbourg, and they were making for Lincolnshire, I think. And it was low cloud, and they spotted that airfield before it was finished. So they crash landed there. Nobody was hurt, apart from one of the ground crew that was making the airfield. He got killed. And it landed halfway across the Thackham Road. And then there was another one just afterwards. They had to unload that and take it to pieces. And we were going down, walking to school. The elder brother that came, he had already left school. And there was just Brother Bill and Sister Peg and me walking down towards the George and Dragon pub. And this Mr. Smith shooting at us, and we could see the bullets hitting the tarmac in front of us. And the floods were out, so we leapt into a house on the left-hand side at Baker's Lane to get out of it. And that went round, and I think we went down to the local pub and stayed there, and then the eldest brother went on to school to explain what had happened, why we hadn't been to school. But this German aircraft were shooting at us on the way to school, yeah.
That would stick in your mind, wouldn't it?
Oh, it does. Whenever I go past that, people must be fed up with me telling, when going down Baker's Lane, I said, well, just down here we were shot at, yeah.
So that was just a hit and run?
Oh, yeah, yeah. There's quite a few cases of it during the war.
Did a German plane crash here?
Yes, it crashed down not far from where we lived. There were 4 members of the crew, but it should have been 5. And so what happened to that 5th one, we don't know.
So were they killed?
Oh yeah, they were all killed.
Oh, so
yeah.
It was an explosion crash, was it?
Oh yeah, yeah, I think it was still, and apparently it bounced along, and a lot of the crew were hanging up in the trees. But there was so much going on around here. When you think there were all the woods around here, and Knepp Castle were full of Canadians, which I fully admire. They're a lovely lot of people. And there was always exercising going on. If you walk home from school, you know, you see a Bren gun carrier come charging through the hedge, and then it'd be followed up by troops and things like that. And above the school, the hedge looking over the school, which I presume, I don't know, there were 3 anti-aircraft guns in the embankment above the school. So whether that was protecting the airfield or not, I don't know. I don't remember being fired, but I can remember the pits being dug, because we used to walk through there. You saw it all being built. And then again, after the war, you see it all the guns taken away, and the bulldozers come in and level it all off. And it was a fascinating time when you think of what has gone on in Shipley. You know, we had the prisoner of war camp around there for the Italians.
And how many Italians were in this prisoner of war camp then?
I would think 300 or 400, I would have thought.
400, yeah.
Yeah, and the better ones were marched out on a morning to work on local farms, and then they marched back in, yeah. And then we had all the land below the Countryman used for practice for dropping American gliders. In fact, in the scout troop, we had one of their tow ropes as a tug of war rope for years and years and years, yeah.
And was there any fraternisation with the local people?
Not that I know. I know she had a couple of Italians down here doing the garden.
Who's she?
Mrs. Little, yeah. And she was, because she was a German, she left Germany in 32 to go and work in Hong Kong, where she met her husband, who previous wife had died of cancer. So she took over secretary to him, and then eventually she married him, much older than her. And because war broke out, she wasn't allowed to do anything. But the vicar wife got her a job to do, sort out the evacuees and billeting officer and that sort of thing. And of course, I was her youngest evacuee. And as fortunate habit, I came out of the army in 57.
That was National Service?
National Service, and been in Germany all those 2 years. And I didn't want to go back to Neff Estate in the Market Garden. And of course, Suez crisis was still the petrol rationing, so I couldn't get a job driving like I was in the army. And so the head gardener at NEP said, "I've got a nice little job for you if you want it." And that was to come here looking after her garden. And you couldn't see the look on her face. She said, "My youngest," and I was never allowed to forget. And I worked for her for 20 years. And then I bought this place. Best thing ever happened to me.
Yeah.
And we brought three children up here, and they've all turned out successful. Very successful, in fact. Well, memories of Elliot Belloc, it's my eldest brother, who must have been 12, 13, or that sort of age. Because when Mum only had a widow's pension, so Mum needed money. And Brother Tom went to work there before school to lay the fire and clean his shoes and any other little jobs. And he used to walk all the way down from Netherwoods, which is quite a way. Well, it's 3 miles altogether, cutting across fields. And one day Belloc said to him, "Where do you live?" And he said, "Oh, Netherwoods." Oh, he said, "You come past a natural spring called Abraham's Well." He said, "You couldn't bring me 2 wine bottles of water, could you?" So Brother Tom, being honest, he done that. He done that for about a week. He's cutting across the fields up there. And he thought, "Well, I'm not doing this every day." So on his way across the fields, there was a water trough, cattle trough. So he used to leave the bottles at night after he'd been back there and fill them up the next morning and take them down. And I don't think Belloc was any wiser. And I can remember, because the eldest boy, when it came to your age or whatever, they always used to, children used to take money to school to save for saving stamps and put them in a book. And sometimes it was your duty to take the money down to the local post office and bring the stamps back. And I can always remember him walking down to the post office with his big cape and his big hat over his head and walking down to the post office. Yeah.
Did you speak to him ever?
No, I don't think I did. But I spoke to his daughter, Mrs. Jebb, and she was a very nice person. In fact, Brother Tom used to do a lot of work later on, and then when he became a builder, he built several bits and painted the place out. And on one of the doorposts down there was all the heights of the children as they were growing up. And Mrs. Jebb said, "Whatever you do, you don't paint that doorpost." So all that, whether it's still there or not, I don't know. But Belloc gave Christmas parties for the local children. The only thing I can remember about that is getting an apple and an orange. For where he got the oranges from, I do not know. But during the war, the Home Guard used to meet there.
At Kingsland?
At Kingsland. They used to meet at the village hall and then go down to Kingsland. And there was, where the new house is, there was a cart lodge. And my brother pulled that down to build a new house. And there was still a lot of the old bottles of Molotov cocktails and all that sort of thing stored around the back. I can remember, well, this is quite later on, when they dedicated the windmill. They'd done the windmill up. And Beachcomber, who was
H.B. Morton.
Yeah, he came down to open it as a memorial to Belloc. I can remember that. And they also had an aircraft, a light aircraft, crash right in front of it. And Mrs. Jebb was most upset because the pilot had died.
Did you have anything to do with the Jebbs?
Only through Mrs. Little, who was very friendly with Mrs. Jebb. And Rex, her husband, he was one of his claims to fame, I suppose, was being an umpire at Wimbledon. And he was a headmaster at Banbury or one of the big schools up there, yeah. Very, very intelligent man.
the Jebs was still there in the early 80s.
Yeah, so it must have been in the 90s, late 90s. Well, I don't think any of her children wanted to stay there.
They didn't want it.
No.
No. And he did, obviously.
Yeah, well, I think he was more sort of patriotic to the family, I think. But I know there's a room down there, whether it's still there or not, because if you look at it, it's still the old shop fascia there. As you look at it, on the left-hand side, there was a bedroom there that Belloc had for his wife, and it's still not altered, or it wasn't, because I went down, because I was chairman of the parish council, and I went down. Charlie wanted planning permission for this new house, and I went down and he showed me all around.
And do you think there were obvious changes in farming?
There were. We done a survey, and there were 30 milking herds, not very big. Some of them 20, some of them 80, round in the parish of Shipley. That's in the not in ecclesiastical, but in the civil parish. And now there is none at all. No milking herds at all.
So what's the farming now then?
Well, it's mainly taken up a little bit of arable. Well, it probably is probably a bit more arable now. Mostly horses. The lands,
Right.
A lot of land's been split up with 2 or 3 acres going to the big houses. Totally different.
So the fields behind us, for instance, what are they used for?
These are used for sheep and horses in the summer. And then we've got the airfield, which used to be sheep, and a large part of this one was a polo pitch. But now Cross Hospital have bought it, and it's going back to arable, which is nice, because we might well get the plovers and skylarks back. When we had that great storm in '87, the whole of Southwater Woods, which was planted up after the war by the Forestry Commission, and it was all planted up with coniferous trees, fir trees and that sort of thing. That was all, about 800 acres of that was completely devastated. And none of it's been replanted. It's all gone back natural as it was. So why on earth do we need another 800 acres of rewilding when that is quite natural rewilding up there? Well, there's a lot of deer up there, but they haven't got no longhorn cattle or Exmoor ponies or whatever. But that's just my opinion. Oh, when we were boys, they were all families living off the land, or the mums and dads would be cowmen or carters or tractor drivers, and they were all families because there were several tenant farms, you know. And now all their houses, especially the bigger ones where the farmer lived, they're all commuters to London. Probably only come down at weekends.
And do you ever hear a Sussex accent here now? Country accent?
Very rarely, very rarely. Although I
You've
don't
got
think.
some, you've got a bit, yeah.
Have I really?
I think so.
I always
yeah.
thought a little bit of London, not
Yeah.
Cockney. My father was a Cockney, but
Yeah, no, I think I can detect. But of course, back in the 40s and 50s, presumably most people in the village.
oh yeah, there were.
Yeah.
You had a job to understand them.
Mm.
We had a village shop by the church, which is the main post office, and then we had a big shop, which is where I met Josie, because their parents bought this big shop, huge shop in Coolham, and Coolham had a shoe repair shop, and they had a butcher's and another shop. And then George and Dragon had a shop where we used to get our provisions on the way back from school, take them up to Mum. And there was one down the Blacksmith, well, it was Blacksmith Arms, but now the Countryman. And so we were well, each community were self-sufficient. And
How long ago did they go, those shops?
most of them went late 50s.
A long time ago.
Yeah, and Josie's parents, they went, they sold up, huge shop. They sold everything from coal to paraffin to needle and thread, and like they did in the old days. And they were also the local bakery. That packed up in the early 80s. And then, of course, the great thing when the royal family came down here, to Lady Amani Buller, her daughter, who married Ashmore, who was the keeper of later on was the keeper of the Privy Purse in the Buckingham Palace. They came down in 52, before the King had died, but before the coronation in 53. Princess Margaret and Queen Mother, and lots of photographs in the village of when they came down. It was interesting because they came past our house at Netherwoods, and the council had been there before, months before, piping all the ditches, sanding all the roads. And of course there's 2 roads leading out of Shipley to Netherwoods where they had the reception. And of course they spent all this money on doing that road, and they went up the other one. I know lots of families, you know, the Rapleys and all those sort of families.
Oh, Rapley, that's it, yeah.
Yeah, and of course they're notorious, or the older family are.
They were.
Yeah.
The Rapley gang.
Yeah.
Yeah, that going back to early 19th century, they were the terror of the district.
That's right. Yeah, fascinating. And I knew one of the, well, I know 2, because the 2 boys, well, they're not boys, they're the same age as Brother Jack, and they were great friends of his. One spent his wartime in Japan, and the other one was in the coal mines in Poland, and they were great friends of Brother Jack, because he'd been in the Navy, and they both died before they were 60. I've had a lot to do with the Scouts, being in the Scouts since 45 when the Cubs were started. The Scout pack, the Scout troop was started in 1934, and the Cubs didn't start till after the war. And I've been a member of that, and I still am. I've just got the books back from the auditor now, and been a very successful troop. We used to meet up here in an old army hut on stilts, and then we got so successful we had to find somewhere else. And on my way to work, I started work at NEP in the gardens up there. I passed an old missionary hall at Dragon's Green opposite the pub, and I said to a scoutmaster who I was working with, we ought to write and ask the landowner, because he was just buying it, because there was no longer any church services going on there. Could we hire it? Because it's a nice big hall. And he wrote back, he said, I'll do better than that. He said, if I do acquire it, which I haven't got it yet, he said, I'll give it to the Scouts. And he put a Norfolk reed thatch on, put electricity onto it, and water, and he gave it to the Shipley Scouts. And we still got it to this day.
Still working.
Yeah,
great.
yeah, very successful troop.